And you can see us some slides there.
Yes, looks good.
Yep.
You sound good.
Sounds good. Just please interrupt me if what I'm talking about doesn't match my screens, as I'll be swapping screens around a bunch. So
perfect, will do.
All right, sounds good. Well, welcome everybody, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Bryce Maxell. I'm the program coordinator at the Montana Natural Heritage Program. We're based out of the State Library in Helena. We're part of this NatureServe network, as you see over here on the image on the right side of this slide. There are heritage programs, or the equivalent of heritage programs, in all 50 states and all the Canadian provinces, and NatureServe oversees and coordinates with those programs on taxonomy and ranks. And then NatureServe also does work around the world. We also collaborate really closely with the Spatial Analysis Lab at the University of Montana on our land cover layer, and also with the O'Connor Center for the Rocky Mountain West on our wetland riparian mapping layer. I wanted to first just go through the basics of the information that we have here at the Montana Natural Heritage Program. We're now managing information on almost 16,000 species. 15,675 is what we hit just before Christmas. With those species, we've got 4.5 million observation records across the state, 460,000 different surveys that could have detected individual species. Those were surveys that were designed to detect either individual species or groups of species. We have 81,000 species of concern occurrences, as shown in the bottom left there. Those are occurrences of species of concern. Not all the observation data would qualify for making these species of concern occurrences. I'll talk a little bit more about them, but essentially these are areas where our state species of concern are known to occur or have reproductive activities going on. So something like a bald eagle just flying over is not going to qualify for a species of concern occurrence, but a bald eagle nest would. We also model species predicted habitat suitabilities, as shown in the bottom right, for a grassland bird species. We've got 1,100 of those species modeled at this point. So all of our vertebrates and all of our species of concern are modeled in the state, and we are working through vascular plants and invertebrates right now. And we develop range polygons for individual species, and we've got range polygons on 2,800 different species. We'll take those predicted habitat suitability models now, and we have a new product that looks at biodiversity across the landscape. So we're stacking those individual models up. In this view, this is cumulative predicted vertebrate biodiversity, or habitat suitability for vertebrate biodiversity. In the areas in hot colors there, the brightest yellow are the highest levels of predicted biodiversity, and then the cooler colors are the areas of lower predicted biodiversity. Won't get into the details on how we combine those individual models. They're shown at the bottom of the slide though. But again, if you keep in mind that the high biodiversity is in those hot areas, you can really see how important the valley bottoms are to biodiversity in the state, both in western Montana and eastern Montana. And you can also see northwest Montana in general being high in biodiversity, and southeast Montana. We've done the same stacking of models for noxious weeds in the state, so we can look at cumulative risk of invasion of noxious weeds. In this case, the red colors are predicted to be the cumulative highest risk of invasion by state-listed noxious weeds, and then the going down to the blue colors there, the cumulative risk is lowest of invasion by state-listed noxious weeds. We also manage the statewide land cover layers and wetland riparian habitat layers. Again, we collaborate with the Spatial Analysis Lab on the land cover layer. There's a link to a story map here that I'm not going to go to, but you've got a copy of this presentation in your OneDrive that you can go to, and you can use that link to get there. Story map that completely describes the land cover layer. Essentially, the land cover layer right now is composed of ecological systems or vegetation communities that are mapped around the state, as well as a bunch of human land use categories. And we have links from in the Montana Field Guide to accounts that describe each of those land cover layer types, whether it's a natural vegetation community or a human altered. One key note on the land cover layer is that we are going to be moving from ecological systems here in 2023 over to the NVC. That's the National Vegetation Classification System. And that's so that we can put both global conservation status ranks on these vegetation communities as well as state conservation status ranks. And it's going to be more consistent with other products that are available in the NatureServe network. On the wetland riparian habitat side of things, on the right side of this slide, all of those areas shown in green have been mapped with modern technologies and methodologies for wetlands and riparian areas. And there's current work going on in the dark gray. Those are rectangles. Those are USGS 1 to 24K quadrangles. And then the blue ones, there's 385 of those left. We're still just looking for money to finish mapping on those. There's also a link to a story map on wetland mapping. There's a really good one that I would encourage you to check out. We also assign conservation status ranks to both individual species and to habitats. And we do that on a scale working with NatureServe and other natural heritage programs across North America. And we assign a G rank or a global rank, and also an S rank or a subnational/state rank in all the provinces in Canada and all the states in the US. And those vary from critically imperiled, if it's a G1 or S1, to secure, if it's a G5 or S5 at either of those scales, the global scale or the state scale. And it's very likely that many species are like an S2 or an S3, but they're a G5 at the global scale. They're very secure at the global scale, even if they might be of conservation concern at the local scale. On the right, I'm just showing you a couple examples of this, looking at US animals in this upper right image. And I know that text is a little small. All animals in the US are on this top bar. And you can see the hotter colors here are more imperiled. And so you can see freshwater snails, terrestrial snails, freshwater mussels, crayfishes, all highly imperiled in the US at this point. Versus if you go down to the next image down, state ranks for Montana animals, invertebrates, you can see a much smaller percentage of invertebrates and vertebrates that are imperiled, either critically imperiled or imperiled at our state scale, telling us what we know. Montana is a very special place, and we'd like to keep it that way. We've been working with the Montana Forest Council on some products that will help both at the mills, scale of the mills, as well as individual landowners on how they can navigate through environmental review, permitting, planning processes, and using our information. And what we've identified is that we need sort of three main products here. We need a spatial tool for mills that they can use for sourcing timber to meet their Sustainable Forestry Initiative criteria so they can get higher prices for their timber. Also a brochure for mills and landowners on how to request information from the Heritage Program, and a brochure for landowners on individual species. So we've made some progress on that. We have this spatial tool in place that mill timber sourcing folks can use to meet Sustainable Forestry Initiative certification requirements. I just want to give you an example of this. We have a lot of information, as I've shown you at the Heritage Program. We have 178, I'm kind of focused on the left side of this slide here, 178 G1, G2 species in Montana. So that's a lot of information to weed your way through. So what we've done is we divided those species out into species that are documented in forest habitats, those that are documented in riparian areas that would be protected if you followed streamside management zone practices, species that you would probably only encounter through accessing of forest habitats, but not in the forest habitats themselves, and then species that you'd be unlikely to encounter. And so when it comes down to all of that, we've got a real focus on about 16 different species of G1, G2s, and only about 4 of those are widespread. The other 12 are just like their only known global location is in one or two or three places. So we're helping to, again, streamline processes and get you to the information you need moving forward. We also have this flow diagram that we'll put into the brochure that basically just kind of identifies how you might work your way through looking at G1, G2 species. And then we're going to make sure we include in this brochure how you can go and get information from the Heritage Program in terms of filing a new request. And essentially, you're going to go to this website and then our homepage. Under the data tab, there's a submit request option. You would set up a user profile, then file a new request for an environmental summary report. And you basically just say, I want an environmental summary report, and then for my particular area of interest. So we're going to switch over now to looking at some live demonstrations of our website and some of the products that we create on our website. And we're going to be focused on the Species Snapshot, Montana Field Guide, and Map Viewer. Spend most of our time in Map Viewer and much less time in the Field Guide and Snapshot. Before I do that, I wanted to note that you have in this PowerPoint presentation that is in the OneDrive, you've got this whole presentation, and at the end here, I've included some summary tips for using our environmental summary report. In the upper right of this slide are various components of the environmental summary report. And basically, we want to make sure that you read these introductory materials that we actually put in the back of the report. So that's step one. And then for coarse filter approaches, as our speakers have talked about this morning, you can use the land cover summary and then field guide accounts for those individual land cover layers. For the fine filter approach, you can use the species report and also the wetland riparian mapping. Again, if you remember from that biodiversity map, a lot of our biodiversity is centered around wetland riparian areas. So important habitats to pay attention to. And then essentially the next step is identify potential impacts as Leah was going through, and you can use our Montana Field Guide to look up information on individual species. And then number 6, super important, never take our reports on their own without, on the ground evaluations by biologists. And then finally, working with agencies to mitigate impacts. And we include a contact list in the environmental summary reports for individual agencies, whether it's DNRC or FWP or the Fish and Wildlife Service. And then if you got any questions about the report itself, you can always ask me. So with that, I want to, first of all, I'm going to just jump right over to our environmental summary report and talk about that a bit. And it comes as a zipped file, and it will have several components in this zip file that you'll get. One is the main environmental summary report itself. Another is an Excel output. And the difference between these two is that the PDF, the main environmental summary report, has all the text information and is really designed to be kind of plugged in any environmental review, permitting, or planning process in the state, whether that's a federal or a state process. It's pretty expansive. It's not going to be very easy to copy information out of that report and put it into maybe forms that you're working on. So that's why we provide this Excel file. And then for any lists of species, we've got field guide PDFs of those. So you'll get a series of PDFs of field guides. And I'll just quickly show you, drag this down so that you can see these PDFs. The environmental summary report, basically the cover page will show you where in the state the environmental summary report is at. This one is for a particular public land survey section, Township 35 North, 26 West, Section 12. And then we buffer around that. Typically our smallest area that we want to provide an environmental summary report on is 9 square public land survey sections. And that way we feel like you're getting a good list of species that potentially or are documented in that area. The next page is that table of contents, and you can click on any one of those table of contents sections to get into those and navigate to them. I pay particular attention to our data use terms and conditions and this suggested context for natural resource agencies, so that you're getting hooked up with the right people to answer your questions, whether that would be Tori or Leah or whoever for your area. Also at the back, as I said, all these we've got introductory materials for every section. We're not putting it out at the front because we feel like after you've read them once, they shouldn't get in your way. But we really would strongly suggest that you read them in order to understand the report well and how to use it and what its limitations are. But then, as I said, we've kind of front loaded that information. So you get right into, on page 3, our native species of concern report information here. So you'll see a map, and then you'll see lists of individual species. And those lists start off with, sorry, my mouse wheel is a little bit behind here. Those lists will start off with species that are documented in the area that have species of concern occurrences. Every species that's listed here will show whether U.S. Fish and Wildlife Section 7 consultation is suggested. So the second species down, bull trout, occurs in this area, and Section 7 consultation is recommended. The next one, the next information category over, is the number of species of concern occurrences in the area that we're looking at. So this is probably just one stream that bull trout occupy in this area. And then how many observations of that species are in the area. So in this case, 38 bull trout observations. The next bar over shows predicted habitat suitability summarized very quick in a bar. And then that same summary information is also seen down below here. So we see that 55% of that area is seen as deductively suitable for that species. So now with fish species, we know that they're in linear areas and not occupying the landscape. And I'll get into why that percentage is so high here in just a second. The final category over here is the range polygon. So this is year-round range for bull trout. We scroll down and look at another species here. Let's go down to bald eagle. It's one that folks are very familiar with. You can see that this PDF will have links out to the field guide. So we can link out to the Montana field guide and get a whole account of information for this species. You can go to our predicted habitat suitability model page and download. Typically, these are 16-page write-ups for individual species that we've modeled. You can look in the field guide at what the associated habitats are, or you could view the range polygon in the field guide. Again, if we look at this bald eagle, we've got one species of concern occurrence based on one observation. So there is a nest in this area. And then if we look at the habitat suitability, we've got, the summary is 16% of it is optimal, 59% moderate, 25% low, 81%. And then the associated habitats, 81% are commonly associated. 81% of the habitats in the area are commonly associated, 6% occasionally associated. We also provide information on how agencies list these species or what their status is for various agencies. And then we provide the delineation criteria here that shows you what we require of an observation in order to make a species of concern occurrence. So in this case, again, that bald eagle flying over, that wouldn't count. It has to be confirmed nesting area. And then what we'll do is we'll buffer that out by 2,000 meters in order to be conservative about encompassing their breeding territory or territory that they commonly use for re-nesting. We will then, that first section is based on species of concern occurrences. This next one are species of concern that were observed in the project area, but their criteria wasn't met. The species of concern occurrence criteria was not met. So we want you to know that they're there, but again, if it was just that bald eagle flying over, we're not saying that the breeding habitat is present. However, we are including modeled output in this case. So Evening grosbeak, the top species on this list. We have 5 observations. None of them were made of breeding, so they were not made species of concern occurrences. However, our modeling shows that this is excellent habitat for evening grosbeak, 100% moderate suitability. And just some rough guidelines in terms of use of these predicted habitat suitability models. Typically, we suggest that if there's any optimal or moderate suitability habitat in the landscape, then you look at that species. And typically, excuse me, I should say over 20% moderate suitability in the landscape, you should take a look at those species. On the low suitability side of things, those species that have high portions of low suitability predicted in the landscape, that typically is more patchily distributed habitat in the landscape. Okay, so our next set of species, so we've got our documented species of concern occurrences, then observed, but they didn't meet the species of concern occurrence criteria, and then other potential species. So these have not been observed in this landscape, but we've modeled their predicted habitat suitability. I should have noted, we model the predicted habitat suitability because we don't have surveys in large portions of Montana. And sometimes when you're considering small areas, this is a smaller area, it's only 9 square miles. Sometimes we're lacking any surveys or very few surveys in that area. And so that's the reason we're emphasizing these model outputs. So the first species that is on our other potential species list here is Townsend's big-eared bat. And we see, again, no observations, 57% of that landscape optimal, 43% moderate. So this is a species that's probably occupying this landscape very, very, very likely. How far do we take this list down in terms of what species we should consider? Again, I would go down to most species that have optimal or larger portions of moderate suitability. So if it were me on this, what I would recommend is, we're still going down here. We've got a lot that have a fair amount of moderate suitability. You can see in the bar chart here as I scroll down that we're getting less and less orange, which is that moderate suitability in the landscape. And so probably all the way down to somewhere in here, we're at 27%, 23%. I'd probably cut it off right there at Rubus arcticus in the landscape. The other thing I would say in terms of clustering species for quickly moving through this is looking at what habitats these species use. And for that, we'll flip over and I want to show you that the same information that we're looking at in the PDF form also is present in the Excel spreadsheet that comes with this. And so you can see that in the Excel output, you've got a list of the species, and we've got a tab here for species of concern occurrences. We have a tab for other observed species. We have a tab for potential species. Each of those tabs has a summary on them of the optimal, moderate, and low suitability habitat. So they also include summaries of habitat. They've got a habitat field in them. So it's fairly easy using this Excel spreadsheet. You can lump them and you could sort them in whatever way you wanted. You could add a column and say, some sort of lumping column that you want to add and then resort them. And so we recommend, again, that the PDF gets used as the document of record, and this Excel spreadsheet is what you use kind of as your working scratch sheet as you're moving through your process. So I'm not going to come back to this Excel spreadsheet, but just note that there's a tab in here for every portion of the report that's shown in the PDF that we'll be going through more. Okay, so that's for that first section of the report is only for species. And we've got a lot of species here at the bottom that have very little predicted habitat suitability in the landscape. The next section of the report is structured surveys. So these are the structured surveys that are documented in this landscape. So we've got flammulated owl call playbacks, 8 of them. No observations resulted from that effort. And the most recent survey was 2005. Next one down, noxious weed road-based surveys, 4 of those resulted in the report of 10 noxious weed species. And the last survey was in 2004. Electrofishing, 37 surveys, 161 observations resulting. Most recent survey, 2011. So you can get an idea of how well surveyed this landscape is for different groups. I didn't note above, but if you probably did notice that there were individual species were color-coded different colors. And so we're using blue typically for aquatic species and yellow for bird, green for plants, brown for mammals, purple for amphibians, and red for reptiles. Then a land cover summary. So the land cover summary gives you a map of the land cover for that area, and then we'll take you through individual land cover types. These are ecological systems at this point, and it will say how much of the landscape, and it's sorted with the ones that occupy or occur in the highest proportion of the landscape first. So we got 55% of this landscape that's conifer dominated, forest and woodland. 14% now that are Rocky Mountain Music Montane mixed conifer forest. There's a little bit of a description of what that system is here, but if we click on this link, that will take us over to the live field guide account for each of these habitat types. Once we get down to habitat types that occupy less than or 1% or less of the landscape, we just we list them out, but we don't provide the base information. You still can link over to them in the field guide if you want to. The next section of the report is wetland riparian mapping. And again, this is wetland riparian mapping done to modern National Wetland Inventory standards. You'll see a map of the wetlands so that you can identify where your project is on the landscape relative to the wetlands that occur there. And then you've got descriptive information as to what type of wetland each polygon in the map above is composed of. So we've got aquatic bed wetlands here that occupy 26 acres, one acre that is diked and impounded, 4 acres that were excavated. And then it'll, again, sort them as to which occurs most frequently in the landscape. So we've got 31 acres of semi-permanently flooded wetlands in this landscape, and then on down the list. There is a link to explanatory information here, so you can click on that to learn more about each of the wetland types. We keep scrolling down. The next thing we get is a summary of the land management for that area. So you can see Forest Service, and you can see in this cross-hatching conservation easement, and the rest is private. We do not summarize any information on private landowners, but we do provide detailed acreages on the public lands as well as the acreages of the conservation easements. We suggest you go to the cadastral layer if you want more information on who the private landowners are. The next section of the report is biological reports that we've spatially assigned to this area. This is an area that we're working on. We're making all of the literature in our databases spatially referenced so that they can show up. You can, any area of the state, you can find spatially referenced reports. And then the final section of the report is invasive and pest species. And these are listed or organized by aquatic invasive species and then the various noxious weed categories. The information is organized in the same way it is above for the native species. You can see these first few on the list have no observations in the landscape. The top one on the list, yellow flag iris, though, there's some riparian habitat there that would be suitable, 30% of the landscape. So we're hoping that you can use this list to, in your land management plans, to figure out what species you might want to mitigate getting spread around as part of your activities on the landscape. The next section down is, again, those introductory materials. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I do want to note that, we always say never use this as your final decision-making tool. Visit the site, have biologists that are familiar with habitats and the species that occur in your area, review this. I did want to show you for sure, though, that we've got this list of contacts, whether it's FWP or BLM or Department of Ag, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Natural Resources, BLM, EPA. We've got all these contacts here for you. And we've worked with the agencies on who should be contacted. So please make use of that. We've also got contact information for all the surrounding heritage programs and all the surrounding states and provinces and whatnot. So please make use of these, all of that information. And again, I'm not going to go through the introductory materials. I'm going to let you read those on your own. I didn't show you yet the companion field guides. I'll just show you one of these, but this is for that list of species that had species of concern occurrences. We see the same cover map on this, and we see that this is the species of concern occurrences from the environmental summary report for that same public land survey section. And for every species on that list, you'll get a 1 to 1.5 page account about that species that'll include an image of the species, its range in the state, observations in the state in a very generalized form, and then what time of year those observations have been observed and submitted to our database. You also get general descriptive information, diagnostic characteristics, and habitat, and if we've got any management information on those species. So again, page to page and a half, and then it goes on to the next species. Okay, so the next thing that I want to go through is just use our websites so that you gain some familiarity with them. And so that's recorded in this video. And first thing I want to show you again is how to submit a request for that environmental summary report we went through. If you belong to an agency, if you've got agency folks on the call, you can get agency level access and run these reports yourself. But if you're private industry, organization, individual, you'll need to submit a mediated request. You'll get the same environmental summary report that they do, that the agency folks get, but we're not allowing free access to everyone for the species of concern information as sort of one layer of protection to those species of concern. So again, on our homepage, go to data and then submit request. And then you're going to set up a user profile and then file a new request after that. You'll log in, set up the user profile, then you'll log in and file a new request and simply say, I want an environmental summary report for X property for this township range and section, maybe for this latitude, longitude, decimal degree coordinates, but put a 3-kilometer buffer around it. You could do it for a watershed. I'll show you a variety of other ways to request information here. So the next thing I want to take you through is our Natural Heritage Map Viewer website. And when you first go to our Natural Heritage Map Viewer website, you'll see a task menu that pops up like this. This is what is available. These are the tasks that are available to anyone. So you could look at generalized information on individual species, or you could use these coarse filter tools, the habitat suitability for biodiversity task, the land cover task, the wetland riparian task. You could look at land management information. We also have reports and documents. These are all NEPA and MEPA documents. Mostly it's MEPA documents that have been filed before. So if you're involved in a Montana Environmental Policy Act process, that would be a great one for you to look up information in an area that you're working in, and maybe you can literally copy some information out of previously filed MEPA documents. I'm going to limit what I'm going to show you today. First, I'm going to go through this habitat suitability for biodiversity task, and then I'm going to log in as an agency level user to show you what agency folks have access to. And I want to note before I do any of that, that there is a video here on the home screen to kind of introduce you to things if you forget what I've said today. And then also on the blue or the white question mark and the blue circle on the top of every taskbar here, if you click on that, you will get access to an introductory video for that task, as well as a step-by-step PDF for that task. I'm not going to play the video, but let's open up the PDF here just as an example. And again, it'll on a title slide, it'll say, here's the steps. Select the biodiversity group of interest, zoom to your area of interest, choose a spatial layer to summarize by, view and interpret spatial and tabular info, and then access other supporting info. And then it'll walk you through each of those steps one by one with some background information if we feel like we need it for the task. So we would recommend that you, before you use a task, read through this, download it. You can have a hard copy at your desk as you're working through using the task. Okay, so back to this task. Very briefly, we'll do the habitat suitability for biodiversity task. And again, this would be a course level filter. I'm going to go ahead and turn off towns. Before I start using this, I showed you those videos that you can access on those question marks at the task button. There's also videos under the help menu. So how do you use the map controls up here at the top? That's covered under one video. How do you use the map layers here? That's covered in a video. How do you use the search for location tool down here at the bottom left? That's covered under another video. So please make use of these videos and as you need to, essentially. For the habitat suitability for biodiversity, you can go ahead and zoom in on the map anywhere and kind of examine those patterns spatially of how the predicted habitat suitability for biodiversity is stacking up. Again, look at these riparian bottoms and how those really pop out in terms of importance to biodiversity. They really stand out. So that's just a visual examination, and then you could turn on other layers like land management information so that you could see, oh, that's Forest Service, that's BLM, whatnot. You can change the transparency of those layers so that you only see those versus mostly seeing the predicted biodiversity. You could turn on protected layers. This is from the protected area database that the USGS manages, and change the transparency of those. You could filter out different protected area layer types if you wanted to. You could also go ahead and create a summary. And I'm going to turn off that protected areas. And let's do a summary for a particular county here. So we've got areas to summarize by, and we'll say we want to summarize by a county. And I'm going to come over here after I've got that. You saw or you may not have seen that, but the county boundaries popped up, and I'm going to just click on Mineral County here. So it'll zoom to Mineral County, and then all the information down below that's summarized in the charts and data window will be for Mineral County. And so we can see that in Mineral County, we've got, and I've got species of concern vertebrate animals selected right now as my biodiversity layer. I'm going to go ahead and move over to all vertebrate animals just to bring this home. Again, all vertebrate animals will get summarized in this report now. We're still in Mineral County. And so we see right off the bat here, 257 vertebrate species are predicted to have suitable habitat in Mineral County. The top table will show you Forest Service is got 82% of the land ownership in Mineral County. And then on Forest Service lands, 62 vertebrate species are predicted to have optimal habitat, 231 of them moderately suitable habitat, 237 low suitability habitat, and 11, this is our aquatic species list here. And then our last two categories over here are introduced range, this pink one, and then winter and general habitat for big game species, 5 species, and general year-round range for 5 species as well. So you can kind of go down this list and look at how much land and how many species individual landowners would be supported. And we can also filter on this. Let's say we're interested only in Forest Service. Well, actually, let me filter a little bit more. Let's say we're only interested in Fish, Wildlife, and Parks lands. So we dropped 6 species out. Now we're down to 251 species predicted. And let's say we only want to look at Fish, Wildlife, and species that are predicted to occur on Fish, Wildlife, and Parks lands that have optimal habitat suitability. So then I can click on that red box, and now I'm at 37 species that are predicted to have optimal suitability. I can then go down that list, and so we were looking at flammulated owl here first, and I can see that for flammulated owl, 79% of the optimal, well, excuse me, let's say it this way, 6% of the county or of the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks lands are predicted to be optimal suitable habitat for flammulated owl. And of that, 79% of the lands are federal, 11% are state, and 10% are private. I think I just misspoke there, guys. I want to correct myself. This is for Mineral County, all of Mineral County here, 6% optimal, not just Fish, Wildlife, and Parks lands. We've filtered to those species that occur on Fish, Wildlife, and Parks lands that have optimal suitable habitat on Fish, Wildlife, and Parks lands. But the summary is for all of Mineral County. So 6% of Mineral County optimal, 79% federal, 11% state, 10% private. So again, you can kind of use this as a coarse filter approach to see how does my property fit in and my species list that I got in the environmental summary report fit in with this overall habitat suitability across an entire county. Or we could have chosen to summarize by a Forest Service boundary, a BLM field office, an FWP region, a large 4th code or 8-digit watershed, or a tribal boundary. So again, I'm trying to get you exposed to these. I'm going to go over to another task now, and we're going to go ahead and log in. If you have a MapViewer account, we recommend you turn on that Keep Me Logged In so that you don't have to log in every time you get in here. And we're going to go to the environmental summary report. The environmental summary report is already, the default is that it is filtered for species of concern, special status species. That includes species that might be listed under the Endangered Species Act, but are not state species of concern. We have a couple of those in Montana. It also includes important animal habitat like bat roosts, and it'll include some potential plant species of concern. That's already set up. In an environmental review process, I noticed in LEAs, and I know this is a very common thing that you might want to consider species of concern, but then, hey, I also want to add additional species. So we've got an additional species category here. And we also might want to say, well, I also want to include elk. And so we can add them individually one at a time. If I hold my control button down, I could go down and select mule deer as well if I wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and clear that, but I just wanted to note that it's easy to add big game species to this. And we have the FWP big game maps that we crosswalk in the environmental summary report. So that's something you may want to do if you're an agency person. At that point, once I've selected my species, I can choose a layer to summarize by. We have more layers available here to summarize by. We could do statewide, we could do county, we could do a buffer around a town, a township, a section. We could do east and west of the Continental Divide, mountain range. We have all of this information pre-summarized. Let's go ahead and select a 6-code Huck watershed in this case. That's selecting the area I previously clicked on the map that was in Mineral County, which is fine for this example. It's zoomed into it. That looks fine. We're on the lower St. Regis River. And then at that point, I can download an environmental summary report that I just walked you through a few minutes ago. I want to show you online here tools that are available, and we can look at point observations for all animal species. We could look at the species of concern occurrences for all species. If I clicked on that, I could walk through individual species, and we could say, well, I want to look at, let's look at Veery. In the same way that I was noting that you could link out to our field guide on the PDF of the environmental summary report, you can do that in our online version as well. So we'll go ahead and do that. That opened up a new browser window. So we've got a full account here for Veery, including photos, sound files, links out to NatureServe. If you want to Google for more images, the range in the state, their range across the Western Hemisphere, a summary of observation data in the state. Again, generalized because this is a public website. What time of year those observations are reported, migration, habitat, the habitats that they're known to occur in, okay? So let's just go down that list. We've got that divided into commonly associated habitats and occasionally associated habitats. Let's look at the top one on the list here. Let's look at aspen forest and woodland. That'll take us over to our field guide for habitat types that are in the land cover layer. And you'll see photos of this habitat, a general description of it, where it occurs in the state, a description of the vegetation species that make it up, a crosswalk to the National Vegetation Classification Scheme. Again, we're moving everything over to that in the coming year here. Any dynamic processes like flooding, fire, or grazing, they're important or detrimental to the that habitat, management for the habitat, restoration considerations, and then we have a link to individual vertebrate species we've crosswalked here, so you could look through that list and see what species are associated with this habitat. So let's go back to the Veery account. Again, we were down here at the habitat list for Veery. There's also food habits, ecology, reproductive characteristics, management. I would say we don't do a great job of populating that management section. It's something that we need to do better in the future on. And then literature cited. So if you were after literature on this species, this would be a great way to get into literature cited and also additional references. We have over 80,000 references in our system for various species that you can access to. And if you click on the PDF here, a lot of times you can get live access to the PDF for that species. So again, we were back here in the environmental summary report before we went down that rabbit hole, but we're showing you how powerful the environmental summary reports are. And again, you've got this in the hard copy PDFs as well, so you can link out to it and use it in the same way. The next one I want to show you is single species overview. So now this is another task in Map Viewer that you would use for the fine filter approach that Tori and Leah described. And we can see that we're zoomed into the same watershed. This is a new browser window that's opened up for us. So you can see the boundary that we had before. The gray dots are survey locations where probably bird point counts were conducted that could have detected this species. There's a grid of them and a line here. Then you can see a breeding record here that a species of concern occurrence. This is a point observation here, but then we've made a species of concern occurrence around that, saying, hey, this species was documented in this watershed. And then we've got our habitat suitability model here shown in these 1 square mile hexagons. So these are, again, 1 square mile in area, and yellow is predicted to be low suitability habitat, orange moderately suitable habitat, and red optimal suitability habitat. Again, what we're recommending is if you see large sections of the landscape in orange or red, moderate or optimal suitability, there's good chance that this species occurs in the watershed or your area of interest, and you should be taking mitigative actions if you need to, or at least considering the species in your process. If it's got, let's say if your project area was in this upper right of the area that we've selected, it's got surveys and was not detected, and it's low suitability, maybe you don't worry too much about the species in that area. Again, that low suitability habitat is more patchy on the landscape in general, speaking generally. We also link out to predicted habitat suitability models, as we talked about before. And yeah, you'll see a very similar layout to what I already went through on the PDF. I felt like it was more important to go through the PDF, but I kind of wanted to show you what the agency folks see. And just to let you know, again, what a private person is requesting, that's what the agency people are seeing. You're seeing the same information. It's just that we're asking private folks to do it through a mediated request so that we're not making potentially sensitive information widely available on the internet. Okay, I'm going to use my last few minutes of time here to take you through. I've kind of shown you the field guide, and I've introduced you to Map Viewer. Again, make use of those videos. I want to quickly show you the species snapshot, and then I'll take some questions here. The species snapshot was designed for folks to create those field guides that we showed you before for an area. So this is a great outreach tool to work with individual landowners, or if you're just curious about what's in your area, you can go ahead and create it for a tribal area. You could create it for watersheds, House and Senate districts, FWP region, continental, east and west of the Continental Divide. Let's do that Mineral County example. We'll just say, we'll go down to Mineral County, and we want a Mineral County. We'll just do birds, and we'll do birds that are a Montana species of concern in Mineral County, and we'll submit that report. So there's 25 bird species in Mineral County that are species of concern that are documented in Mineral County. You can see the number of observations and species of concern occurrences. And at that point, you can also look at our delineation criteria for what qualifies as for a species of concern occurrence and all how the agencies list these species. But at that point, you can come up here to the upper right, and you can either download an Excel file, or we'll do this, we'll download a PDF of that. I'll go ahead and put it in that folder, that's fine. Open that up, and I've got my own custom field guide for birds of Mineral County that are species of concern. Again, these are one-pagers showing the range, observations in the state, what time of year the observations were reported, that you can use, Black Swift there on the next page, that you could use for landowner outreach, or to learn a little bit more about what species are there, what they look like, and what habitats they use. I think with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll take any questions that folks have.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryce. There's one question in the chat box that came up from Dale earlier in the presentation. He asked about if the Excel is geo-referenced in any way, and I think that was in particular to the environmental summary reports Excel report.
Yeah. So that the environmental summary report, the Excel, it does not have latitude, longitude information in there for individual observations, but whatever area, was the summary boundary, that's what it's georeferenced to. So it's the exact same information that was in the PDF is in the Excel, and it is for the area of interest.
Excellent. I had a quick thought and question through that your presentation there. I was curious where the program is getting its kind of land cover and structure data from that really drives these models, and how frequently that's updated.
Yeah, so we use over 60 different environmental input layers for that. Land cover is one of them. The land cover layer is our land cover layer. That's the habitat information. Some of the others we're creating ourselves. It might be a slope or an aspect layer that we're creating. Elevation. Again, if we went through and downloaded, if you had an environmental summary report, there's a link under each species to go to the predicted model page. You can download the write-up for that. And that write-up will take you through, it's got a whole section describing all of the environmental input layers. But we've got geology, we've got ruggedness, which pulls out rock outcrops pretty well. A whole bunch of temperature and precip data. We do not do anything on modeling of future climates. Everything that we're doing right now is modeled on recent climate data. I think we might still be a couple years away from tackling future climate stuff. In terms of we want to get other information is just a higher priority than predicting future climates at this point.
Awesome. Well, that looks like all the questions we have in the chat. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to put them in there, and Bryce, you could answer them throughout. And if you wouldn't mind putting up your contact information in that chat box as well, that'd be fantastic.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I really encourage folks to go to